Curse of the Gravewalker 2, Return from the Darkness. There are places humans should never return to, and curses that should never be awakened, but some cannot resist the call, even if it means stepping into eternal darkness. The Cursed Night, a path back to hell. The night was drenched in darkness so thick it felt unnatural, as if the moon itself refused to shine upon the cursed land. The bare trees whispered warnings with the howling wind, trying to scare away anyone foolish enough to approach. The path leading to the abandoned house stretched longer than it should, as if the very earth was resisting, slowing down the footsteps of those who dared to return. But Ethan didn't stop. He couldn't. A force beyond his control was pulling him forward. Every step he took on the damp ground echoed strangely, as though another pair of feet followed him, matching his movements precisely. Yet, when he turned around, nothing was there. And yet, he wasn't alone. A cold shiver ran down his spine, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Something else was there, something that shouldn't exist. Then, he heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, as though spoken directly into his soul. "You came back. I knew you would." A cold breath brushed against his neck. His body stiffened. But the terror wasn't just in the voice, it was in something far worse. His hands were covered in blood, and he had no idea how, or why. What no one realized. The escape was never real. They thought they had escaped when they left that house the first time. They believed they had outrun the nightmare that had almost consumed them. But they were wrong. Something was off. Something they didn't understand yet. Michael had gone disturbingly silent. He no longer spoke, no longer made a sound, as if his voice had been taken from him. Sarah refused to look in a mirror because, whenever she did, she didn't see herself. She saw someone else, a twisted face, smiling mockingly. And Claire, every night, she repeated the same chilling phrase in a trembling whisper, "We're not alone. He's here. And he won't let us leave." But no one believed her. Not until reality itself started turning against them. Doors slammed shut by themselves. Lights flickered and died without explanation. Footsteps echoed on wooden floors in the dead of night, but when they checked, no one was there. Then the real horror began. Objects moved from their usual places. Family photos on the walls no longer showed their faces but those of strangers, faces filled with dread. But the worst moment came when Michael woke up one night, and found that his bed was no longer in his room. It was somewhere else entirely, in the basement, surrounded by walls that were breathing. Inside the void, where time does not exist. When Ethan disappeared, they assumed he was dead, that the entity had taken him and he would never return. But the truth was far worse than death. Ethan wasn't taken. Ethan was replaced. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the world he knew. He was somewhere else, a place outside of reality, an endless void with no sky, no ground, no walls, only darkness. Living, watching, waiting. Time did not exist here. The laws of the universe did not apply. Then, a voice spoke. "I have been waiting for you, Ethan." It was deep, distorted, filled with rage and an insatiable hunger. A figure emerged, formless, shifting, as if it floated outside the constraints of reality itself. It had no face, no body, but its eyes. Its eyes were familiar. They were the eyes of a dead man. The man who had tried to kill him years ago. "You chose to return, and now, you are mine." The transformation, when a human becomes a gateway to hell. When Ethan returned, he wasn't the same. He stood in the middle of the room, unmoving, his eyes shut tight. But when Claire hesitantly stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat as his eyes snapped open. They weren't his eyes. They were the eyes of the entity, blood red, filled with unfathomable hatred. His voice changed, warped, layered with multiple tones. Some were familiar, screams, whispers, sobbing voices. Then, he uttered something that made Claire freeze in terror. "You have opened the door, and now, I shall open a greater one." The ground trembled. The walls melted, no longer solid but pulsating like living flesh. The house wasn't just a house anymore, it was transforming into something else. Something alive. Michael tried to run, but the door was gone. Every exit had vanished. There was no way out. They were trapped in a nightmare with no end. Beyond the curse, the ultimate evil, the house was never just haunted. It was never just a place filled with restless spirits. It was a gateway, a temple for an ancient entity that should never have been awakened. And to fully release this entity, they needed a vessel. And Ethan? Ethan was no longer a victim. He was the key. That night, when he returned to the house, he wasn't coming home. He was returning to where he truly belonged, but this time, he wasn't alone. This time, he was bringing hell itself with him. The end. Or just the beginning. Will his friends find a way to survive? Or has evil finally won? In part 3, we will uncover the true horror behind the curse of the Gravewalker. The nightmare is not over. Are you ready for part 3? Police car light warning. What comes next is even darker, even more terrifying. Police car light. You've seen the horror unfold. You've felt the fear creeping in. But what if I told you, this is just the beginning? Something far more sinister is coming in Curse of the Gravewalker 3, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Warning: mysteries will unravel, but at a terrible price. Warning: the curse is spreading, and no one is safe. Warning: Ethan's fate is sealed, or is it? Fire, are you brave enough to face what's next? Fire clapperboard, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this terrifying saga. The darkness is waiting, and it's watching you. Backhand index pointing right, don't let it catch you off guard. Click that subscribe button now, and we'll see you, in the nightmare. Dare to enter the nightmare? Watch part 1 now. Fire, it all started with one mistake, and a curse that should have never been awakened. Fire, what if you stepped into a place where the dead don't rest? Where every shadow hides a secret, and every whisper calls your name. Drop of blood, the terror begins in Curse of the Gravewalker part 1. Drop of blood warning: a haunted house with a dark past, warning: a group of friends trapped in a nightmare, warning: and a horror that refuses to stay buried. Clapperboard, watch now, if you dare. But be warned, once you enter the nightmare, there's no turning back. Backhand index pointing right, click the link and witness the beginning of the curse.